Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bold, the University of St. Thomas podcast. Bold aims to inspire, encourage, and urge students to be your bold self by gaining insights through dialogue with UST students, alumni, sharing their experiences. And today we're with Dr. Tammy Smithers. She graduated from University of St. Thomas in May 2020 with a Doctorate of Education in Ethical Leadership. She is currently an adjunct professor at UST and also a visiting scholar at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice at Rutgers University. So Tammy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much, Bridget, for having me.
And Tammy, we saw your story posted through the marketing department about your connection with Matthew McConaughey. And I reached out to you because I was like, there's something deeper here. I want to know more about this person. So really just tell us about who you are, where you grew up, how you started doing the work that you're doing, just a little bit about your life.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, that was a great story. And it's a great part of my history in terms of who I am today. And just to know that I had that impact was amazing, was an amazing feeling. But basically, Bridget, I essentially am a native Houstonian, born and raised right here in Houston, Texas. And I was born in a time period where I grew up in Third Ward. I was born in Third Ward, Texas. And then my father moved my mother and I to this area, South Park, which is more south central part of the city. And during this time that I was born in the 70s, the early 70s, there was a lot of remnants of this racial integration of schools. And so I share that story because as a social scientist and scholar, I'm so interested in how the past sort of dictates someone's future. And for me, that time period was crucial. Of course, we know about the Brown v. Board of Education ruling back in 1954. And then here in Houston, there was another case 2 years after that was Dolores Ross and Beneva Williams. Dolores was 7 years old and Beneva was 14. And they were trying to do the same thing in terms of being able to go to the school that was closest to their home. Now, I share this, and this case was actually against the Houston Independent School District, which is where I received the most of my education later in my secondary years. But I share this story because this part of history in Houston and where I grew up was really during that time where there was a lot of white flight going on. And so my parents, my dad and mom, raised me in a very nuclear type of environment. Everybody in my neighborhood had a mom and dad living with them, and like these 4 houses on my street in this community, we were all raised together. And so very religious household, very Christian upbringing for me. And I was also exposed to another religion, the Catholic faith, through my neighbors. And so I sort of grew up in a hybrid of both Catholic and Southern Baptist, and really got a lot of those values that were instilled in me at a very young age. But I share all of this and also the story about the cases because this is how my education sort of came about. I went to private schools earlier on, all the way up into the 4th grade. I went to Catholic school from 3rd to 4th grade, and then after Catholic school, I went to Houston Independent School District public schools from the 5th and 6th all the way through high school. And so those years for me were in a situation where I was in an all-Black environment in one end, and then again during the late 70s as segregation or desegregation was happening in the school systems, the then superintendent Billy Reagan was successful in sort of creating these majority to minority changeovers from the areas in town that had predominantly one race. And so because of that, I was able to go to a middle school, Albert Sidney Johnson Middle School in Meyerland and Bel Air area. And so I was able to get a little bit more exposed to not just people that look like me, but into other people. And so that sort of set me up for being able to be educated and have access to better schools outside of my neighborhood, and be exposed and recognize that there are differences in all of us, but in essence, we're all the same. And so that sort of, for me, was the pivotal moment in terms of my own educational upbringing. I did attend high school back in my neighborhood. And so again, that was sort of a change, but because of that majority to minority sort of changeover, we had what we call magnet programs. So those magnet programs would allow other people to sort of move into or come over into schools where they could major or have specialties in certain areas. And so for my high school, that was the aviation program. I was not in that program, but I was in the honors program of the school, of the high school. And so I was able to sort of excel and do well in my studies. That set me up for being able to now leave my neighborhood and go off to college. Now, initially, I wanted to go to an all-black college and have that experience. I wanted to go to Spelman, all-girls college, very prominent in Atlanta, Georgia. My parents said no, it was too far because of the out-of-state tuition, also very costly. So I ended up having to, I won't say settle, but ended up having to go to the University of Texas at Austin. Now my sister, I have a half sister who's 10 years older than I am, went to this university 9 years ahead of me. And I essentially visited the campus at 10 years old. So I kind of knew a little bit about the university, and I knew if I didn't go to Spelman, that I would then eventually go to the University of Texas at Austin. And so I landed there in 1987 at the age of 17, and I was away from home for the first time for a long time. And so that experience, again, I told you how in junior high or middle school, I was sort of exposed to other ethnicities and races in terms of my upbringing, in terms of integrating for schooling. But the one thing that happened to me, I had my first sort of, I would say, overt sort of experience of racism at 17 years old, okay? We packed up my belongings from Houston to take me to Austin. I went up there to school with another friend who was also from Houston. And my parents went ahead of me. And so I rode with my friend who was gonna be my roommate with her mom and her sister. We got to this private dorm because we could not get on campus because it was already full. And so we were at the private dorm in this area of, they call it West Campus of University of Texas at Austin. And this particular dorm was all girls, and it was sort of situated in sorority and fraternity row, okay? And so as my mom had been there, she had already started setting up our room, and there were, it was like a 3-bedroom suite. We had a resident assistant who had her own room. We had the middle room taken by 2 white college students who were also gonna be freshmen. And then myself and my roommate were gonna be in the other room. So when we walked in, the other ladies were already settled in. So they probably thought, okay, it's one black girl or African-American girl, we can deal with that. But when 2 of us walked in, the look on their faces and the immediate turnaround, and then maybe shortly thereafter, they come in and they started packing up. Now they were already, everything was already laid out. They started packing up their room, and we knew what that was about. And, my mom, my friend's mom, we kind of just, brushed it off like we always do in situations, and just thought, well, they're lost. And so they ended up moving out into another room, and we had another resident assistant move into that middle room. So here you have 2 students with 2 RAs in their suite, which obviously, for reasons that we know, was because the other 2 girls just did not want to live in that room. And so that was my first experience being a student at the University of Texas at Austin. And classes hadn't even started yet. So my first experience, I'm away from home, and this is welcome to college, right? Welcome to this experience. But, that experience was something that I do remember, obviously, so many years later, but it just made me understand that there are people that are just not gonna like you for whatever reason. And so, but it didn't stop me in terms of, setting up myself for success for future in terms of my goals. And so I went through life. I ended up actually becoming a resident assistant within that dorm my sophomore year. And I was actually the first Black to actually be a resident assistant in that dorm. So fast forward, and I know you mentioned Matthew McConaughey, and so I'll get to that in a second, but I went through majoring in journalism and public relations in the School of Communication at the University of Texas at Austin. And I was active on campus, I worked on campus, I worked off campus, and I worked off campus in a restaurant and bar, which is where I met Mr. McConaughey. I was his waitress, and I was also a college student. And after a few visits to the restaurant, it was basically really hopping at nighttime because it was a live music, live bands and all of that happening. But he eventually decided that he wanted to work there too. And so we became not only just now, he was not my customer, now he was my coworker. And he was my coworker and someone that I had to train because I was kind of like the head waitress. If you ask anybody, Tammy ran the place, right? And I think that's what he mentions in his book, Greenlights. But Matthew and I did work together, became great friends. Now I kind of gave you my background in terms of, growing up in an inner city, all Black environment. Now you have me at 20 years old working in this particular establishment. And then you have Matthew, who is from East Texas, rural, very small population. I believe he came from Longview High School. So you have two different people, two different races, two different genders, two different life experiences in the same place who would end up becoming really great friends. Now, I didn't know how great a friend he thought of me as until he writes about it in the book. And for me to have been in his book, and I know he took notes over 36 years, for me to be in that book meant that he had to journal about this friendship that we established. And so that made me feel really, good about, always sticking to my values, who I am as a person, the way that I was raised, to see the good in people. That's all due to my upbringing.
Yeah, you had touched on how, in these moments throughout your life, you've kind of had to recognize and be fully who you are in those moments, regardless of either what people think or the situation that you're in. How do you think that speaks to what you're going to share with us with the work that you're doing now, and even, some of the choices that you're about to start making within your career and within your education for yourself?
At 22 years old, I'm a college graduate, first generation graduate. I think as African Americans or Black or any individuals who are maybe of color or a marginalized type of population, we always feel like we have to go out in the world and do something because it's not just for us, it's for other people. And so that is a lot of how I sort of sought my place, my direction in this world, because I had other people that were looking for me, looking up to me, and not for me, but looking up to me, some that I knew, some that I didn't know. And in fact, every decision I made, every move that I made, I had someone else tell me that my daughter watched you. Or, they pattern themselves after what you did. And so I didn't know that. But, that was the way I was raised, to have these sort of, values. But moving into life, my life and my direction, I shared this with some students a couple of years ago through Kappa Delta Pi, which is the honor society for the education school here. And in sharing that story, I talked about how my direction in life wasn't like a straight path. I kind of hit some bumps in the road. Sometimes when you are first generation graduate, you don't always know where to go, what to do, how to do it. You just kind of figure it out. You grab mentors along the way. I didn't know what that was, but I had them. And then you kind of figure those things out. And so my career path, as I sort of moved through life, took me in places where I was the first, or I was the only, or like, ooh, that's a really big job. Is she going to be able to do that? Is she going to be able to, have a great presenting face to our donor base or our CEOs? I was at 27 years old faced with this type of pressure. I worked for an opera company here in Houston, the Houston Grand Opera, and my donor base were CEOs. And so I kind of had to muddle through a lot of that, but I'm well-spoken, I'm poised, I'm all of those things, I'm educated. I have what you have, right? But I always felt like I had to kind of try and do and be a little bit better, just to prove, that I belong there. I was at the opera for 4 years. I was then challenged to better myself via education. And I was in a position, I had purchased a home, I was kind of, in a good place. And I thought, it's time for me to go and advance, and learn more. I get sort of, I won't say bored easily, but I do want a challenge, right? And so it was time for a new challenge. And so what that challenge ended up being was I applied for the MBA program at Rice University down the street. And I applied to the program, and I remember having conversations, countless conversations, and I had already been exposed to this a couple of years earlier, but I wasn't ready. But when I was ready, I was ready to apply and go through the process of what it took to get in there. Like I said, I had a home. I was above the age of 30, past the age of 30 actually. But I thought, if not now, when? And so this was a good time, personally, I think, for me to make that decision and go for this new challenge. So I did that. Now, in doing that, being a native Houstonian, I talked to you about how I grew up and where I grew up. I actually did attend Rice University when I was a teenager in summer classes in a program. But I got accepted into the program. It wasn't easy, but I got in. And I became not necessarily the first, but I did have some first moments, right? And in that situation, I learned a lot about myself. I had to really, really stretch my mind and, really I'm a creative person, journalist, writer. Now I had to be a little bit more right brain, a little bit more critical thinking, a little bit more, like hard numbers. I had to really stretch that part of my brain because I wasn't really, accustomed to that. So that whole process, that 2-year program, within that program, when I go somewhere, I make a mark. I leave a mark. You will know that I was there, right? That you will know that I was there. And what I did, because I was a fundraiser in my previous, career, I raised money. I knew how to raise money. I was very creative. I always wanted to push the envelope. And so as an MBA student, I was a full-time student, mind you. So I quit my job at the opera and went full-time. And as a full-time MBA student, I was all in, and I was a part of this women's MBA group. And everything I do, I'm always, my affinities are women and my race, right? Either or, both. And so in this situation, I was a part of this women's group, and I was the chairperson of this big women's conference. Now, we had done, I think this was the 7th annual. No, this was the 4th annual when I was there. We had done them before. But my mission is always to make things better. So what did I do? I made it better because I knew that we had a really solid product. I knew how to put things on. I knew how to put things together and bring the right people to the table. But in doing that, another challenge came to me, and that was, well, I had raised money. They had never really raised money the way I raised money. So I raised money, and I was bold in my ask, and I ended up raising enough money to endow a scholarship. We actually had 3 scholarships that we were able to put together and give to, 2 different students. So we settled on, I think it was 2 students, but we kept the other in that balance. But we were able to kind of endow this scholarship. And that was just an idea that I had, because I'm like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it right. And so if you know me, I don't know if you don't really know me, but those who do know me know that I that is how I roll. And so I did that first. I happened to be, Black woman, but I was able to address my graduating class with this new thing that this student, obviously I am a mature student, but this student did. It wasn't a staff member, it was a student. And so I was able to sort of, I won't say shine, but shine a little bit. And I think a friend of mine brought that to my remembrance just the other day, actually, because she came to my graduation. And so she said to me, sometimes, we think we have to do so much to belong, but sometimes we just have to be, right? We just have to be, and being who you are, and, that's just what you do, right? So belonging, sometimes we try to, belonging was always something I tried to do, but really just my belonging is just my being, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's why I'm interested, you had talked about, we can maybe transition to your time now at University of St. Thomas, because that was very formative, even in the work that you're doing now in your visiting scholarship. So let's talk a little bit about UST and what that program has been like for you, and getting into that.
Sure. So I graduated undergrad in 92, then in 2002 through 2004, I'm in business school. I have this whole career, second career, post-business school. And that moved me from the from Texas to the East Coast or Northeast, depending on where you're from. But I was living in the tri-state, New York City, New Jersey, and then also Pennsylvania areas. I lived in all Jersey and Pennsylvania. But I had this career in financial services, and that all brought me eventually back to Houston for personal reasons, for family reasons. And so in that, and I'll kind of get to that part in a second, but in coming back to Houston after working on a little bit on Wall Street and in financial services in general for 3 Fortune 100 companies, I had to make a decision professionally and personally. And so that personal decision was I had to come back to Houston to tend to some family situation with my parent, one of my parents, actually both of them, but one parent. And so in doing so, made that decision to go and teach in a business school at Texas Southern University, undergraduates. So that sort of life change, that pivot, if you will, because I did have this career in financial services, that pivot in my professional life brought me to the classroom. The classroom being, okay, now I have to sort of adapt to academe, right? Or the academy, as we call it, or academia. And so I ended up getting a doctorate or trying to find a program. And then I found St. Thomas's program and thought, this is a good fit. I don't have to leave. It was perfect. I came to the program that I felt was the perfect program to nurture a new me, okay? Nurturing a new me. And a new me meaning I am no longer, bound by certain systems. I don't have limitations, I don't have this way of thinking that is telling me that I have to espouse to certain values. Those are your values, right? I have to create my own, right? My own values, meaning values of being able to not only be at the table, but also be able to call out things that are not right. Because I've been in situations where I did not call things out when I should have. And so the program taught me all of that, right? I have a new mission. And the program within the University of St. Thomas's School of Education and Human Services, in the form of ethical leadership, with the undergirth of social justice, creates this one mission for me. And that mission is to educate, empower, enlighten, and disrupt status quo thinking, right? That is my mission. That is my only mission at this point in time in my life. What the program did for me in these moments that I reflect over the last 3 years was it gave me the language, right? I did not grow up as a social justice activist. That's not me, right? I didn't grow up like that, but I did know right from wrong, good from evil. Those are the things I knew, but I didn't know how to, have the language to talk about what this feels like, what this looks like. You did that, that's not right. As a student in the program and then a candidate, I published, I presented at conferences, I published, I pitched for some things that I didn't get accepted for. I was accepted to present papers, sometimes with my team or just as a solo presenter. And I did that throughout the program. And I really sort of stretched myself even further through the incidents that happened in the summertime, okay? So as I was sort of coming out of the program and finishing up my residency, we had, as we know, George Floyd, and some of the other incidences that happened. George Floyd, in that moment, was my moment to say enough is enough, and how can I take that frustration, I won't say anger, but that frustration in terms of what we as a society constantly go through. This is beyond what I experienced as a 17-year-old, where I was, sort of, people didn't want to be around me. They didn't want to live with me because I was Black, right? Now this is something that has come out so many years later. And we have a situation where everybody is now wanting to talk about it. So I talked about it, but what I did was also write about it. I wrote about it, I channeled it, I wrote sort of solutions for what we as a society can do. I look to my allies, my allies meaning white America, who want to be in the fight with me on this, to share with them what they could do to help educate themselves first, and then become a partner in the sort of chipping away at the systemic issues that we face as a nation. And so that is the work that I've been able to sort of continue doing throughout this year. I mean, that happened in May, June, July, and every month I was doing something. I was speaking on panels, a la Zoom, right? Across the country, audiences in Chicago or California on diversity and inclusion, as either a guest speaker or a joint speaker with other individuals on panels. And so that is sort of the work that I began to become involved in more so out of, George Floyd. And so I want to say I sort of happened into this space as sort of an emerging, I won't call myself an expert yet, but an emerging scholar into the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with social justice.
Your life has seemed to lead up to so many of these things where you had mentioned before you've had these experiences and you're making sense of them through education and through getting that language and through becoming more fully who you already are. And then now you're to the point where you're like, okay, let me use that education for others. Let me educate people. Let me empower them. Let me enrich them. Let me disrupt the status quo. It's a beautiful coming together. So to kind of, put it all in perspective for people, how do you think, all these things that are happening in your life and, as you look toward the future, how you want to affect change, how you want to be bold, right? Be your bold self in the way that University of St. Thomas calls all of us to be. How do you see you doing that, but also with the undergirding of the Holy Spirit and your faith and your core belief system guiding you to do what's right in the world and to do what's just?
I don't know what that is. I just know that that's me being me, right? That's me being me being me because I understand what it means to not have, not be included, to be looked over, to be discounted, to be, second guessed. I know all of those things. And knowing those things, but because I know who's in me, who is the sort of head of my life, and God is the head of my life, I can continue, moving forward in such a way that I do it with grace, I do it with honor, I do it with respect for who I am.